So we're beginning with part 2 of the story. So, Pop, why don't you just go ahead and take us through to the next step of this? It's fantastic.
Well, it is a joy for me to sit here and reflect on that particular time. I'd spoken to you about the fact that, I think we brought us up to a point where the Second World War had broken out and my mother had gone into the military. And which brings me another part, transitioning, because prior to my mother going into the military, basically for us, his mom was a waitress in the Afro Club there in Birmingham, Alabama, where as a child I had occasion to see a lot of people a couple of them that became a bit on the famous side later in life.
The Afro Club, what was that?
The Afro Club.
Yeah, what was that?
It was literally.
She was a waitress there.
She was a waitress.
So it was a club. It was
like a
nightclub.
You go to eat.
Got it.
But it was. We got up there and she was a waitress, and which is one of the reasons that I'm so, I guess, always connected when people wait on me in a place. When you get good service, I want to be able to give them a good tip. I want to recognize and respect. You're waiting on the public, and and as I spoke to you about God being always centered, and hopefully throughout, as it still I know is real in my life today. Living with my grandmother, as I said, when my mother went in the military, we had to be adopted, Harriet, Ruth, and I. So we were not only the grandchildren, we were in guardianship as children to my grandmother and grandfather, my mother's mother and father. We were still very connected and close because by God's grace, we all lived in the same city on both sets of grandparents, which is what I sorrow about so many of the young people through the generations. Families, as things have grown, we spread here and there and lose such connect. And we blessedly had the benefit of when we started school, all of our school teachers lived right there. I mean, life was different to that degree, but it seemingly was easier to have solid foundation, which I look at today. You always knew where you were stepping from, because if you got out of place, one of your neighbors might grab your little butt and smack you around, and you were hoping they didn't go home and tell your mom, because then you'd go get another beating there. Right. Not like today again. Right. But it taught us to love and respect, a great deal more respect for authority. But as I said, she worked in that Afro Club, and that was a fascinating part for us. Going up there once in a while as little kids, you're witnessing people, adults, in their free spirit of clowning, but in entertaining and witnessing things like that. My grandmother, though, going back to Christ and God in our lives, Big Mama did not play. She was one of the busiest ladies, doing for others and doing for her family and keeping an immaculate house and keeping children well cared for and this, that, and the other. And she drilled it well into her daughter, my mother. Children need to have chores to learn early in life of shared responsibility. I remember one of my first chores was we had fireplaces throughout the house and little potbelly stoves that you had to get the scuttles of coal.
How unusual would you say, because I don't know, how unusual would you say it was for a black family to have a house with fireplaces and such and have, I guess, enough room for all of that? It might not have been that unusual, but I'm thinking at that time, not everybody had that same experience.
I hear you, and not everyone had that same experience, because we were blessed where our house, never forget the address, 401 11th Avenue North. Now, we had lived in the project for a moment, my mother and father, I guess when they first got married, trying to have their own, but like history has it,
that's Gwendolyn and Arnold, right?
back to the house, and our house, as I said, I know what you said is it wasn't so for everybody, because some of my friends lived right there, and on Enon Ridge there in Birmingham. That was those set of project apartments. They lived in apartments. But the homes were beautiful, and they were homes. There was no question about this was my home. We today might look at it as an apartment because there was like four or five stories of it, and so it certainly wasn't as individually contained. We were blessed to be always in a house that had ground around it, had to have gardens. My grandmother had to grow them vegetables. My grandfather too, and of course, garden had lots of multiple purposes because Big Daddy didn't care so much for trying to put everything in the bank. Somebody, because we didn't own those banks then. There's nothing like those Mason preserve jars. That was those jars that we did a lot of preserving of vegetables and fruit things and jellies. Those jars. That garden was the big boy. There was a part designated spots of the garden that were Big Daddy's bank.
he would have you bury the money out
there.
Well,
he would have us to bury it. And by God's grace, as I said, talking about the love for him, I guess I was one of the few that somehow my grandfather always wanted. He must have been trying to tell me how much he trusted me, because he carried. I went around with him. He carried me so many places with him, and it was just very normal. I share that experience with some of my grands today, and I know the joy of it, but I didn't realize it until I experienced that personal joy. But yeah, I really knew it when a couple of my buddies were out there. We were digging up, and they accidentally dug up my sister and a couple of my friends out in, not the corn, we were beyond the cornfield, but there was a set of rows, we had watermelons, we grew everything out there. But they dug up a couple of them jars, Lord God Almighty, that had money in them. And oh boy, thanks be to God, we ran in the house with them to tell Big Mama. They had to redo the garden, of course.
Right.
But that was funny. But my grandfather he made money from many sources. But my grandmother and my grandfather knew what was going on. She had a heart as big as gold. And though we were in the midst of horrific segregation of the races at the time, but because of the war and passing through the period of depression, my grandmother helped as many poor whites around us, because then you couldn't just go to the store and buy food. There was ration stamps. And if you wanted to get sugar, it wasn't about the cash in your pocket. You had to have these stamps, the government stamps, and certain things. I don't remember all that you had to have the stamps for, but I know my grandmother. She passed out quietly, or maybe secretly passing out stamps, because there were people who pawned their stamps to my grandfather, so he'd give them cash for them. And my grandmother had them, and it was always a gifting thing for them, and I knew that. And I you never lose those memories. And my grandfather, as hard as we lived in the racial things in that period, there was a higher level of truth in my judgment then than there exists today.
What do you mean by that?
We live in clouds, myriads, clouds of deception, because we'd like to all think the best of ourselves. It's a comfortable place to believe that you don't have prejudices, and it's comforting to humans to believe that they are fair-minded and open in context. But I think there was a greater recognition of humanity,
more truthful recognition of humanity,
and than there is today. It was less of me than mine. There was a greater appreciation for the hour,
right?
Which Big Mama used to tell us. Remember, it's our Father.
Okay.
Our Father. That means we are. And those were lessons we learned there at 16 at what they call vacation Bible school. Big Mama would drag us to and make us go to during the summer at 16th Street Baptist Church there. That same church where the little girls were killed years later. Although, after at the end of the war, of course, we We went to Catholic school. But I thank God for that period of my life. I was baptized in that church on Easter Sunday. Because, I don't know, I just mainly wanted to make my grandmother happy. And I'm not ashamed of that. Because I watch children and have watched people who wanted to make their parents happy, wanted to make their grandparents happy. And I think that's a nice, I don't know, it's a joyful thing for me to experience and see. But, because I sure want to make my grandmama happy. I learned a little poem, got up in the pulpit and said my poem, and walked over with my little white sheeted gown or whatever it was, then had to walk down those steps into the pool, where it was the baptismal pool, and get dunked down.
Talk a little bit about Big Daddy and the fact that he was a businessman and what that actually meant during that time.
Let me say this about his business. Businesses.
Okay.
And it for me, it was all incorporated in one of his most continuous teachings to us, and certainly he shared and pushed with me quite a bit. That America is about business. My grandfather didn't graduate from the 3rd grade, and I was always very proud that he was always open for learning, though. I remember sitting with handwriting with him. And he had set me up in a little business. I remember he put my mother in an upholstery business. He had all kinds of, he wanted all of us to be in business. He said, but getting a job in America ought to be about learning how to grow into ownership. America is about ownership. That's his mindset. Quite frankly, he was a numbers banker. He went to Chicago and learned how to do that with some others and came back to Birmingham. And yes, he started in fact,
I think it'd be okay right now.
What he did with that was help so many families, fed so many, employed so many. He had the construction business. He wanted my father to take that over. My father was college educated. He was a math man. He went on further. But Big Daddy owned a baseball team too. That was another facet of my life that I really appreciated a little bit later as I continued to grow. A baseball team known as the Birmingham Black Eagles. He once had a little involvement with the other one, now continuously more famous team called the Birmingham Black Barons.
So talk a little bit about that. You got 2 minutes to really say something about that team, because I want to end with that.
Well, the team, and as I said, it came a little bit later in life. Some of my most memorable things from him, of course, naturally was every once in a while I get a chance to ride on the bus with the ball players. We would do barnstorming, as they refer to it, going from field to field in the South. Now, mind you, these fields were owned by whites, and where we played for the most part. And my grandfather had a knack of putting me in the cage with the man who took the tickets, telling them, you don't mind my boy staying here. I don't want him around all that language out there and all that, which somehow a lot of them seemed to buy that. But I had a job. My job was to watch the man that he wasn't doing one ticket for him and one ticket for me. You know, I was supposed to copy the numbers off the beginning and know that number, and then make sure the last ticket, I got the number off of that last ticket, so my grandfather could figure out what he was supposed to get.
Right. So he was making sure that he wasn't getting cheated.
Yeah. So I was like there on a different note. I missed a lot of games like that. And so every once in a while I got a chance to see some games and some portions of the games after the last ticket period or so. But one of the things I do remember was during the off season, I remember Jackie Robinson, and this was actually before we lived in Philadelphia, but he used to bring Jackie Robinson down, Roy Campanella and Don Newcomb, but it was mostly Jackie Robinson, Campanella. And Jackie would stay in our house. He actually, when he came to Birmingham, he stayed in our home. But he would build up a team out of picking players from the local, some, guys, known players, playing against my grandfather's team. And my grandfather, like one time he brought she was the one of the first females that played in Negro Baseball. Her name was Tony Stone. She played from the New Orleans Creoles. And, but there are other things I'd tell you about that, but that was just a fascinating period to have Jackie Robinson come down with his team to play against, and then traveling through the South and being able to be with them and share that. That was one of my grandfather's businesses.
Thank you.